more on the new tax law known as the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act, or FACTA, we're joined from San Francisco by Robert Wood, tax lawyer and managing partner at Wood LLP. Thanks so much for joining us, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get straight into this. So this new law, FACTA, is going to start July 1st, and it's going to require all financial institutions around the world to report directly to the IRS all of the assets and incomes of U.S. citizens with about $50,000 or more on their books. Now, it's a very complex law, so very briefly and simply explain the requirements of this law.
Well, I think, Michelle, as you say, it requires direct reporting. I think one of the surprising things to me as a tax lawyer is simply that the world has embraced FATCA. I think there was a time when FATCA was passed by Congress in 2010 when many people thought that before it started to kick in 2 or 3 years later that it would be repealed or at least substantially modified. And of course that hasn't happened. In fact, the world has embraced FATCA, and a huge number of countries have signed on. So there are two different reporting mechanisms. In some countries, there is direct reporting from the banks to the IRS. In other countries, which I think has been very sort of cleverly designed, there is an intermediary, which is the government. So in some countries, the banks, a foreign bank reports to its own foreign government, and that foreign government in turn reports to the IRS. But in either case, I mean, the same information gets transmitted, which is account holder information, and that, of course, exposes Americans.
Well, you mentioned that the world has embraced this, but really Americans living abroad always had to pay U.S. income taxes. So how is this so significantly different?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. That is, there was a requirement, and has been for many decades, that U.S. taxpayers pay tax on their worldwide income, which of course doesn't necessarily mean that they're being double taxed. It may hopefully be that if they're paying tax in Canada or China or wherever in the world they may reside, that they are claiming a foreign tax credit on their U.S. tax return. So the theory is that they're not being double taxed. And of course, there are also tax treaties, but that they must report on a U.S. return. So that's always been true, but obviously a lot of people didn't really do it very well, and there wasn't the level of compliance and scrutiny that there now is.
Is the U.S. the only country that does this? Unlike other countries, Americans living abroad taxed not only as citizens of that country that they live in, but also as residents of the U.S. Is this typical just to the U.S.?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think there are a couple of countries, but nothing of consequence. The only major sort of industrialized country that does this is the U.S. And that, of course, rubs many people the wrong way, and leads directly into your story that many people are choosing to give up citizenship rather than sort of continue the reporting regime that the U.S. has.
So what impact does it have on the state when we have people renouncing their citizenship?
Well, I mean, it's a controversial subject. I mean, there are various groups, and there are some Americans abroad societies, sort of expat groups, that are trying to sort of get a residence-based tax system, more similar, say, to Britain's tax system. But that's a hard sell in the U.S., and I think given the number of governmental problems we have at the moment, it's unlikely that that will happen, at least in my view, anytime soon. So it's sort of, you know, you get along and hopefully get by, or you do something else. And for some people, the do something else is renouncing. I mean, it's kind of an extreme measure.
Edward Saverin of Facebook, one of the big people that have renounced. So we've got that as a side effect, yep. But this is aimed at actually increasing revenues for tax evaders, but this is really affecting ordinary people as well that don't even make that much money. Tell me about the complexities of the forms and what impact that's having on ordinary people.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is true that the forms are complex, and that you could say that about not simply this part of the U.S. tax system, but about all parts of the U.S. tax system. I mean, if one looks at, for example, a Singapore tax return or a Canadian tax return, I mean, they're quite simple by comparison to the American forms. So, I mean, I suppose a lot of this, as I know your viewers understand, a lot of this sort of began with the 2008 and 2009 UBS scandal in Switzerland,
Right.
where the IRS successfully, sort of went after UBS and then others since then. But the forms are complex.
Okay. Right, it's
yeah,
a complex
I
issue. Taxes are never fun to talk about, but we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thanks so much, Robert Wood, tax lawyer and managing partner at Wood LLP.